Whip Grana, Whip Niniba. This is tonight's day 3 of the intro. I'll try and give a break in between the readout of the comic and this brief intro. If you don't know what Regeneration 1 is, it's a small IDW run written by Simon Furman after Phase 1, so it's a sort of return to IDW, or was a return of IDW Transformers by Simon Furman, after he had already stopped working with them. So it was a sort of standalone, and it had 100 numbers. And we're going to read his extract, so there's no need to actually explain it, but it's actually a continuation of the Marvel comic run and the UK comic run, because those apparently never had a proper ending, or the planned ending by the parts of the writers, of which Furman was part, at least for a significant portion of the run. So this sort of goes and finished that story, and didn't receive, I think it's all drawn by Guido Guidi. I think it didn't receive much attention, and I spoke to Guido Guidi during a TFCon a couple years back, and he was sort of taken back or sad about the fact that Regeneration 1 wasn't receiving, or hadn't received, a lot of attention. I didn't despise it particularly. The reason I didn't pick it up a lot and picked it up later and slowly was that IDW Transformers was already, I'm not going to say cumbersome from a lore point of view, but we were well into Phase 2, I think, at that point when Regeneration 1 came. I think it was when also G.I. Joe Transformers, something like Liechtenstein take on. It was a small run. I don't remember the name of it. But it was fun, and this was more or less during that time, and basically I think too many people were invested in IDW lore and buying the comics, and people who were jumping on were maybe trying to pick up the old material, and there was a lot of it, and for example, it took a long while for me to sort of catch up with all the Phase 1 spotlights and materials, and it became a lot easier when Comicology came out. So this is I've also had a convo with somebody on the forums, and I don't want to say names, but I was particularly struck by the conversation because he was explaining how he went back into comics, or had to stop it because he had been involved in and I don't know the names. I'm ignorant on regards. I live in Europe, so I don't know much about tornadoes in the United States beside what the news says, and I haven't pretty much lived it on my skin, not even passively, as part of something that involves my peoples, my nation, my country, my whatever. But this guy was talking about being able to keep a subscription in a comic book store, which was shut down for 2 years, and then eventually came through with all his subscriptions, and he managed to catch up, or still has some catching up to do, but was left behind because of this. And I'm saying this because Comicology is, at least for me, an alternative to physical storage, which allows for, I don't know about you guys or how your life is or will be in the future, but compared to previous generations, at least my life has been a lot more moving here and there, moving houses, moving to places, moving countries. So sometimes physical lore archiving isn't functional from a geek's point of view, as it won't be available to you if you're leaving it about in places. Let's just make the example of your parents' house, and if that is in another country, or if it's not even, or if you put it in a garage and it's in a box, or whatever may be the case. Physical stashing of comics, other than, if you're into it and if you do it and if you have a lot, you can, but I'm not the kind of person who sort of takes care of them or wants to take care of them like they're with the intention of sort of reselling them or having them acquire value in the future. I know some people do, or a lot of people do. It's just not what I want to do with them. I don't have the energies, time, space, or whatever it is. It's a whole thing, I think, and if you want to do it, fine. I'm not saying anything about it. I'm just saying it requires some sort of investment, if not in money, at least in time and energy and whatever it is. So Comixology gives a great alternative, or any other sort of comic storage, online storage. And I must say, I really enjoy the, if you see in the guided view, it really helps out with being able to see, and I'll just show you something in case, a lot more in detail, some images which otherwise are just lost when you're reading a comic in hand. For example, this. I'll show you the one page. Now let's go and look something that sort of has a lot of things in the panel, which isn't a two-pager. Yeah, well, I suppose this can go. But you manage to see a lot more of details that otherwise you just wouldn't have looked into when those little panels are so small. And yes, you do lose resolution, but you also manage to see at a level of detail that isn't really possible when the image is so small in your hands. And I actually really enjoy in time being able to read comics like this, which is part of the reason of why I want to read them out. And I'll say this once at least, so it's out there. But part of the reason I do this is not to sort of have my version of these things or or appropriate these notions. It's rather to every time there is a reboot or somebody wants to make a cartoon or a movie, similarly to how they want to when they make a movie out of a book, it's never the actual story that you read on the book or on the comic. It's a sort of readaptation, and even when it's really true to it, traditionally they always make some small changes to the animation. So, and I'm fine with that. I'm not saying it's not a good thing or it's a bad thing. I'm not even going into that. All I'm saying is that some of these stories are appreciated for how they've been portrayed on the specific media, which is comics, and it has a following and fans, and people appreciate it. And it's one thing to say, of course, sure, we'll homage it with a cartoon, which is mostly inspired, but even in Gundam nowadays, when the same very year they make a cartoon out of the very comic that has been published that year, of the most recent iteration of Gundam, it's still adding a little bit things to it. Anyways, I don't see Transformers or Hasbro doing what Gundam does, simply because it has its hands in a lot of other things that make it do a lot more money. And it probably isn't worth the effort to go through what Gundam does with, Bandai does with Gundam, I suppose, which is basically making comics and cartoons yearly, and keeping the media continuously updated. And it's a trend that can be seen with a lot of Japanese franchises from the 80s, or cartoons from Devilman to Yamato to even now there's a return, I think. Well, no, I think the return of Fist of the North Star has sort of slowed down, and anyways, that's not the point. What I'm trying to say is that it's one thing to watch a movie inspired from, it's another thing to read the very story exactly as it is, exactly how it's portrayed on the comic. And I find it enjoyable to be able to read it with without having to read it, with the sound effects, with the voice, and with the voice acting or whatever you want to call it, and being able to really focus on the images, because you don't have to read it. And that's what I do sometimes when I read the comic. I'm focusing on the story, on the lore, so I'm skimming through the images and I'm concentrating on the concepts, on the story, on the narrative. And as I said, the panels sometimes are really small, so sometimes you just don't even bother with going into them that much. But when you can, and when you have everything else out of the way, it makes the media more fun. Yeah. And that's mostly why I like doing it at the moment. I like reading them out. I like making them available for myself from an archive lore perspective, so that I don't have to read them, but I can watch them. And I try and tend to sort of redact the material which is not lore related or history related. And I sort of work towards this thing that I'm trying to define the best possible, but which at the moment I see as something like the Transformers Lore Hall of Fame movie, or something like that, which is just basically a mashing up of all the best lores or interpretations of Transformers that can be kept into one vision, so that slowly, as good things come out of new Transformers media, they can sort of be summed up instead of either cancelling or just rebooting and forgetting everything that was behind. This is rather, at least for me, a way of building on what is being made and what has been made. And that is my perspective on it, I suppose. We could go back and read Simon Furman's Regeneration, but I suppose that's we've made a 12-minute talk, and that should go as a standalone, so maybe I'll just stop the cast and give it time to process and upload, and then read that intro. Ooh, okay.